Hello everyone, I'm Brian, welcome back. So, the first few minutes of the first part, I thought about that a little bit more. Again, I'm not going to figure it out over 24 hours. It's just not how I am. But, as I thought about it, what I guess kind of blew my mind a bit is the sheer fact that here's consciousness and here are the thoughts. Separate. Consciousness, thoughts. I see that. I answer that. Next thought. I see it. I answer it. It's more along the lines of the fact that your consciousness, things has to manifest in the consciousness for you to be aware of it. So your experiences are manifested in consciousness, your consciousness. Now, I'm not going to involve the pure the Atman yet, because that's a whole different, bigger thinking process. Just in personal experience so far. So here's the thinking so far. Anything that you experience must manifest in your consciousness for you to be aware of it, for you to answer it, for you to say, I want to do this. So if it doesn't manifest in your consciousness, then it doesn't exist in a sense. It's not to say it doesn't happen, but for you it doesn't happen. So if you lose your sense of sight, that whatever you experience will not manifest in your consciousness because you're incapable of seeing it. Again, this is being limited to personal experience, personal consciousness, not the fact that obviously everything is made out of consciousness. It is the how to say, the duality in a sense. Well, not really duality. I guess, yeah, it's duality in a sense. So I'm trying to understand this portion of it first before I bring it into the ultimate consciousness, the supreme, the pure consciousness, the Brahman. Little bits at a time. So, and that's what kind of blew my mind. Is the sheer fact that maybe the reason for this consciousness is that everything must be experienced in your consciousness. Therefore, if it's experienced in your consciousness, it is part of you. Because you don't experience externally. And the way I was thinking before is that your consciousness, like Swami Tadatmananda, I believe, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name. It's the white guy. Was it him? No, it was someone else. I think it was, as a matter of fact, I think it was Rupert. He says that your consciousness, it might have been Swami, Sarvapriyananda as well, says your consciousness illuminates the thoughts. But perhaps that these thoughts, expressions, emotions, experiences manifest in the consciousness. And therefore that's the reason why these thoughts, experiences, let's just call it that, is because you are the consciousness, and it must manifest in the consciousness for you to know anything about these things. Perhaps that. Again, this is something I really have to think about. Now I have to think about what they've said before with the new knowledge that I've obtained or realized and try to interpret it that way. So, yes. I want, and again, this is not to go to the ultimate reality that everything is consciousness and everything is manifesting within consciousness. That would explain it, obviously, but my explanation is in just a little bit bite-sized of a small part, that for just you alone, everything that you experience manifests in your consciousness for you to experience that. And then you can take that, you can expand it out to the pure consciousness, or the ultimate consciousness, that everything within this, everything in the universe is experienced within this consciousness. That's the reason why we're all this one consciousness. Well, I just explained that and it makes sense to me. Holy crap. But I still want to think about that a lot more. I hope I made some sense. And let me know what you think, honestly. That's the reason why it's mind-blowing for me. It's just maybe they've said it and I just didn't understand it. I'm late to the party. That, again, just to repeat, things that you experience must manifest in your consciousness for you to experience it. Otherwise, you cannot experience it, which would make sense as to why existence must be able to be experienced If it can be experienced, it is part of the consciousness. If it cannot be experienced, if it doesn't exist, it cannot be experienced, therefore it's not part of the consciousness. That's my thoughts so far. I could be completely wrong. There could be some finessing to do, absolutely. But that's my thoughts at the moment. Let's go ahead and get started.
Yeah, Swami Muktananda's slogan was, God dwells within you as you. Any more comments on this topic, Swami?
Can I introduce a question here, which normally Rick does not speak about, but I would like to know his views on this, which is yes, which is dualistic religion. Notice how Rick took it one step. Rick and Rupert, of course. Rupert does not normally speak about this.
Rupert, yes.
Rupert, sorry. Notice how Rupert took the dualistic conception of God, mediated by the omnipresence of God, to the non-dualistic realization. God's being must be my being, which is perfect non-dualism. But there is, and I'm one with Rupert there, absolutely. I mean, I don't disagree one bit. But we must admit there's a vast number of people in this world, not maybe in this audience, but a lot of people who would not want to go so far, who would want to hold on to their individuality and have God as an other, and find some theological way of finding a distinction between God's being and our being, and set up a dualistic, maybe a loving relationship based on faith and surrender and worship to God.
I'm wondering what he just said there about wanting this dualistic relationship. Something I just thought whenever he said that was the fact that why do we want this dualistic relationship, or why do these people want this dualistic relationship? Perhaps some of them cannot handle the fact that they are responsible for their own actions. There may be some people out there who think they're doing something is because of the cause of demons, devils, or even God himself or herself or itself or whatever self, however you perceive it. And perhaps that separation, saying, oh, I'm doing this because the demons, whatever, permits them to kind of fight that behavior because they don't see their behavior as that. That's another behavior being enforced on them. But if there's a separation, they can fight it. But if they come to realize that these bad behaviors are their own doing, they cannot handle it. Now, this is probably a very small extremist point of view. So now, who thinks that their bad actions is caused by something other than themselves? I think a lot of religious people tend to praise their good actions to their God, but the bad actions to themselves, which is honestly a good thing, because they say, oh, I did something bad, it's my fault, it's not God. God can't do this because he's perfect, so therefore it must be me and I must better myself. But there are people out there, very small, that needs this duality as a way of separating their bad behavior from themselves. I believe that. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but it seems like it, because you see a lot of extremism where they do things because of their deities. They do bad behaviors. They don't attribute that to themselves to say, oh, this thing is telling me to do it, that's why I'm doing it. And you can take that a little bit, not quite too extreme, but to people who do bad things, it's because they believe something is enforcing them to do it and they can't control themselves. And some of them potentially would have their minds broken if they realize that they are the one that's doing it, because they don't see themselves as being a bad person, but yet they're doing these bad things, so it must be something else. I'm not a bad person. Something is causing me to do these things. Just a thought there that I had.
So where would Rupert stand on this? Because in classical Advaita Vedanta, there are two ways of dealing with this. One would be that this kind of dualistic devotional practice is helpful ultimately to non-dual realization, which is the real thing. A classical Advaitin would say ultimately you have to come to the realization that I am Brahman, I am the infinite, for enlightenment and liberation. And dualistic worship is a good stepping stone towards that. That's one way of looking at it. There's a more liberal way of looking at it, but Sri Ramakrishna would say, instead of privileging non-dualism above dualism, so these are different approaches, and all of them ultimately set you free from samsara. So what would, Rupert, what would you say to that?
I tend to agree with the first approach you just suggested, namely that this dualistic devotion towards God is valuable in that it attenuates the ego. But it does not uproot the ego. In fact, for the ego to be truly uprooted, or it cannot be uprooted because it doesn't really exist as such, for it to be dissolved, this dualistic relationship between self and other, whoever that other is, whether it's a person or a God, must come to an end. So you see, even if we take the dualistic idea of devotion of God, how has it arisen? Let's use the analogy, Swami, that both you and I have used, the analogy of a dream. When we dream, we localize ourselves as a separate subject of experience within our own dream, and we look out at the dreamed world. And the dreamed character feels itself to be small, finite, limited, and indeed a product of the world that it perceives. And because the world it perceives is immense and magnificent, it is quite natural for the so-called individual, the dream character, to ask, what did all this emerge from? Whatever this emerged from must have been prior to and larger than itself. So whatever, and therefore they conceptualize a God that is beyond the universe, prior to, but beyond it and greater than it. So hence this trinity that you suggested: God, the world, and the self. So from this point of view, we enter into a devotional relationship with this marvelous, magnificent, infinite God that is the creator of all of this. But even from that point of view, if the world is created by or emerges out of this magnificent, infinite God at a distance from ourselves, if the world is a creation of that, and we as separate individuals are a creation of the world, then whatever the essence of the world is, God must be the essence of what we are. So even if one follows the dualistic, the common dualistic idea of self and God, if one follows that all the way, one must inevitably at the end come to the realization that the being that I am is a localization of the only being there is. In other words, in either of these two perspectives, what you and I would consider to be the true non-dual view of God, or the more dualistic view of God, if you go deeply into the dualistic idea of God, that there is only room for one being. There is only room for God's being. So that the dualistic, sooner or later, even if one pursues the dualistic approach, one must come to the realization that there is no other self in me other than God's being. That to me is true devotion to God.
Interesting. I was thinking, it's like, no, there are probably some people who can separate themselves from God. Just because it was created by God doesn't mean it is God itself. But then I started thinking, it's okay, well, I think this is where the hard part comes maybe for some people, is the fact that, well, if there was nothing and God created it, it had to come from God. God had to manifest it into existence, therefore it is part of God, because otherwise it would not have existed. Nothing can create something, although that's a very interesting way of looking at things. Like, how did even if you don't believe in God, how did the universe exist? It couldn't have come from nothing, because nothing can create something. Same thing with God. How did God exist? Well, nothing can create a God. So that's a very difficult question to pose, but let's just say God has always existed, or the universe has always existed. Then God must use, God, if God's only going to exist, God must use his powers or his abilities to create something. And whatever is created is made from God. That's actually an interesting way to put it. But some people I would say some religious people can probably see those things as being two separate things. What is created from God and what is God are two separate things. Just because it was created from God doesn't necessarily mean that it is God itself or part of God. Probably. Just guessing.
Good. Next question. Okay. This is a question about awareness. A block of text on Rupert's site reads, everything we know is known through awareness. Therefore, our knowledge of anything is only as good as our knowledge of awareness. This question came in from an anonymous questioner.
Sorry, I'm thinking about that question to what I just stated earlier about consciousness. I was just thinking, again, just for the 5 seconds that I thought about it when it just came up, we are always conscious of everything, always aware of everything, but pure consciousness doesn't have to be aware of everything, because it is everything, so it doesn't have to be aware. So for us to experience something, we must be conscious of it, aware of it, unless awareness and consciousness are separate things here. So, like the deep sleep, well, no, I don't know. It's just, there's something there for some odd reason. I have to think about that more.
Who asks, does this quote say anything more than the obvious fact that we can perceive and act because we are conscious? There are experts in every field of human endeavor who know little of awareness but accomplish amazing things. So, and there are a couple more questions. So I want to dwell on awareness for the next few minutes, but pick it up from that particular question to start with.
Swami, would you like to respond first? Or
All right. I'll start with the tail end of the question, that there are experts in every field who accomplish amazing things. That's true. From a classical Advaita perspective, in this world of Maya, this world of appearance, you can do amazing things without knowing the ultimate reality of this appearance. You can have technology, you can have science, you can have medicine. All of that can be done, right? And art, and everything is possible without knowing the root of things. But notice there is a limit. We do not know the answer to the ultimate questions of what is all this? What am I really? And also, there is always this nagging problem of suffering. Even with all the marvelous things that we can do in science and technology and art and even religion. So in all of this, there still remains lack of fulfillment, the lack of answers to ultimate questions. So those are answered only when you probe deeply into it. Notice, even in science, our deepest question, we live in a world of modern science, so we have to take a look at that. And I'm not trained in physics, or I'm not a scientist, but I can't help but noticing that even in this determined quest for a solution to the riddle of the universe in material terms only, we've just ended up with paradoxes. Scientists could explain this better, but there doesn't seem to be any solution coming up at all. So we are ultimately thrown back upon the one which is experiencing all this. As Rupert says, upon awareness. Let me give you an example. We have here the senior most member in our ashram is Bill Conrad, who's 96 years old and still going strong. He is a veteran of the Second World War and a physicist by training. And he has a question. He says, you see that everything appears to awareness and there's no proof of anything apart from awareness. So I can suggest a scientific experiment to prove you wrong, Swami. Let's put up a, sorry. Let's put up a camera in this room and leave the room, let the camera, video camera keep recording. Then we come back into the room and we play the recording and we see we were not, nobody was in the room, at least no conscious being. And this room existed. The camera, the film shows that the room existed even when we were not in the room. So doesn't it prove that things can exist? So my answer to him was, Bill, notice that you see the room in your awareness.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
You propose the experiment in your awareness, and you are aware of the camera being set up, and you are aware of us leaving the room. In your awareness, we come back into the room. In your awareness, we look into the film of the camera, and in your awareness, we come to the conclusion that there must be something other than awareness. It's still in your awareness. At no point did we step outside your awareness. And to make the point even more clear, I said to him, is it entirely impossible that this could all be in a dream? Could you dream that you're setting up an experiment and leaving the room and recording an empty room, coming back and deciding that the room exists by itself, and the next moment wake up and say the whole thing was in the dreamer's mind? He had to say, on principle, it is possible.
Yeah, I've heard some scientists say, like, how do we know that this is not a simulation? What if you right now, the reason why you're watching this YouTube video is because this is a scientific experiment for you, designed for you, because this computer knows that you wanted to watch this video, so it's presenting it to you, and now you're watching this computer-generated video thinking that this is reality, but in reality it's not. You're just in a simulation, and everything that you experience is just made for you, and you alone. Scientists says, yeah, I can't deny that.
So ultimately, everything that is going on is absolutely only in awareness. And once one begins to understand this, one sees it's an obvious fact. Why did I never see this earlier? And the implications of this are tremendous, even for science, even for technology, even for art. What is it that is doing science, technology, and art? We do not know. It is only awareness which is doing it, and it has meaning. It has existence only because awareness is. It is appreciated. We are aware of science and technology and art only because of awareness, and we appreciate the beauty in science and art again because of awareness. So I would totally agree with Rupert when he says that it all comes back to awareness.
And just to elaborate on that, I'm going to respond to the first part of the question, Rick, because Swami addressed the latter part of it. I think you started with the question started with a quote from my website saying our knowledge of reality is only as good as the mind through which it is known.
Only as good as our knowledge of awareness.
It's only as good as our knowledge of awareness. Is only yes. Let me change that slightly. Our knowledge of reality or the universe is only as good as our knowledge of the mind through which it is known. Why? Because everything that the mind knows, and all that is known of the universe is known by our mind, is filtered through the limitations of that mind. So in the same way that if one looks at snow through orange tinted glasses, the snow will appear in accordance with the limitations of the medium, the glasses, through which one looks, and the white snow will appear orange. Of course, the one wearing glasses has been wearing them all day, so no longer realizes that they are wearing glasses, and they believe that the snow is orange. No, the snow has no color of its own. It appears orange because of the medium through which it is being perceived. Now, the medium through which we perceive the universe is called the mind.
I will say that brings up the infamous um, dress that was like blue and white or something like that, but some people say it's a completely different color. Then there's the sneakers. I don't know if you want to look that up or not, but there's this dress that broke the internet or made a lot of people start questioning reality a little bit. And it's a striped dress. Some people say I forget what colors they were, but to me it was like blue and white. I think it's been a while, but it's kind of crazy. And that's another thing that goes to what he's saying here, how we perceive the world is very subjective, because when you look at the color blue, some people say, oh, that's not real blue, that's darker blue, or that's lighter blue. It's all because of how they experience blue in their life. And when someone says, oh, that's the color blue, it might be a lighter color blue, but now you know that to be the color blue, not a lighter blue, but the color blue. And also that could be something with your eyes too, with how it filters the light. There could be, maybe it filters out too strong or not strong enough, and you get a little deviation. Again, the dress.
which consists of perception and thought. So how do we know that the universe that we perceive, this multiplicity and diversity of objects appearing in time and space, is not simply a reification, an objectivization of the limitations of our own mind? In other words, that our own mind superimposes its own limitations on reality, which, divested of those limitations, is infinite or unlimited. We don't know that. How could we ever? So does this mean that it is not possible to know the nature of reality? Does this mean that our knowledge of reality will always be tainted with the limitations of the mind? No, because if the mind investigates itself and discovers what its own essential nature is prior to its limitations, that is the one knowledge that the mind is that is possible, that is not subject to the limitations of the mind. In other words, when the mind is divested of all its limitations, its unlimited essence or reality shines. And so, in other words, our knowledge, the mind's knowledge of its own essence, awareness, is the only knowledge there is that is not tainted by and as such an expression of the mind's limitations. And therefore it is reasonable to conclude from this that the only knowledge there is that is not inherently limited by the mind is the knowledge of awareness. Awareness is knowledge of itself. And that is the only absolute knowledge there is. By absolute in this context, I mean the only knowledge there is that is not relative to the limitations of the mind through which it is perceived. And there is no need to posit, as Swami said very, very nicely in his introduction, that there is no other reality in the ocean other than water. There is a single reality. Well, we know, even if from the point of view where we consider ourselves to be a product of the universe, if we are a product of the universe, then the essence of ourselves must be the essence of that which we are a product of. So all we need to do in order to know the ultimate reality of the universe is to know the ultimate reality of ourselves. And if we do that, if we trace back our experience through all the layers of relative knowledge and experience, we arrive at this, the knowledge of our essential being, the awareness's knowledge of itself, which must therefore be the absolute reality of the universe.
Swami, do you want to comment on
that? Can I just make a comment on that?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yes. And I totally agree with what Rupert just said. I was just hearing in my head voices of different scientists I've come across, physicists, mathematicians, and neuroscientists especially. And they have a chorus of protest because of a misunderstanding. They seem to feel that we are invalidating science. No, what Rupert just says does not invalidate science. Within a relative sphere, in the sphere of appearance, even without knowing the ultimate reality, science works. So at no point does Advaita or non-dualism ever contradict science. So you can do science without being a non-dualist. You can do science by being a realist and a materialist too, and it will work. Only thing is, there'll be two problems. One is you will not answer the ultimate questions of what really ultimately all this is. You'll never get to an answer to that. You will end up with paradoxes, whatever your discipline. Mathematics ends with Gödel's paradoxes. Now I'm entering into dangerous territory, which I'm not an expert on. Physics, I understand, is at the heart of physics lies some terrible paradoxes today. And neuroscience ends up with the hard problem of consciousness. So you will not come to a final deep understanding of what's going on here. That'll be one problem. The second problem is you will not solve the problem of suffering and ultimate meaning of life. That can only be answered by knowing the nature of awareness, that we are this unlimited being awareness.
I just add something to that, just follow on from that, Swami, that this objection that you raise on behalf of a chorus of scientists and neurologists, and that we are invalidating science. On the contrary, what we are speaking of is the ultimate science. Unless we understand the nature of the mind through which all knowledge takes place, we cannot possibly expect to know anything about the objects of knowledge. So unless we know the nature of the mind, all science is the activity of mind. It is a series of perceptions and a series of thoughts. It is the activity of a human mind. So unless a scientist knows the nature of the mind through which all knowledge of the universe is known, we cannot be sure that our knowledge of the universe is any more than a reification of the limitations of our own mind. Therefore, if we want to know anything about the nature of the universe, we first must know the nature of that through which the universe is known. So we are not invalidating science, we are upgrading science. We are making the very obvious point that if we want to know the nature of the universe, it is necessary to first know the nature of the mind through which it is known. Our knowledge of the universe appears in accordance with our knowledge of the mind through which it is known. So I would suggest that what we are speaking of is the ultimate science. It is not an invalidation of science. It is the science upon which all other sciences must be based.
Let me know if you understood that. I did. He repeated himself a few times, which was very interesting. I don't know how to summarize that though, but the basic that I could summarize it to is that if we have a flawed understanding of ourselves or our mind, we will have a flawed understanding of reality, because our mind is the basis of all knowledge, and if we don't have the understanding of our mind, we won't have the understanding of reality, because the process of reality is through our mind, and if our mind is flawed, then our knowledge is flawed. So if we have true knowledge of the mind, then we will have true knowledge of reality. So, well, okay, I just came up with that at the moment, but close enough, I think.
Yeah, I would say we're kind of rescuing science, since the materialist paradigm is the predominant one in the world, and it would seem that paradigm, the predominance of it, has had disastrous consequences in so many ways. And this leads into a question from Anil Mathur in Canada, who asks, how do we know that the awareness we feel is a reflection of our true self, existence, consciousness, bliss, and not just a product of the brain? Since someone, you or Swami, just alluded to neuroscience and the hard problem, it was the Swami. And I would say, we can expand this question a bit. Can materialism and its subtler form, panpsychism, be empirically disproven? And then there are all these other sort of isms, idealism and panentheism and so on, that people debate over. how do you kind of, and someone else in a different question asked, where do you see non-duality going in the next 50 or 100 years? And that might weave into this one, which is that you feel that non-duality, if it's coming into its heyday, will help to reshuffle these perspectives and paradigms until eventually we'll no longer live in an age where an erroneous perspective such as materialism can have such dominance.
Well, one question at a time, sir. Jeez. I can't remember what the first one was.
Both of you can address this.
Do you want me to go first?
Either way.
No.
Okay. Yeah, this is something that is I find interesting because I've met David Chalmers here, who is here at the NYU. He's the head of the Mind, Brain, Consciousness unit here. And he's the one who coined the very popular term now, the hard problem of consciousness. He advocates panpsychism. So now...
Give me 1 second. I need to take a picture of that one. Panpsychism. Never heard that before.
There are two ways of going about it. One way is to show that in the hard problem of consciousness and panpsychism, as David Chalmers is putting it, is not the ultimate solution. Is not at all what Advaita Vedanta is saying. Advaita goes much deeper. Another way, which I prefer, is to take what we are given by, say, neuroscientists right now, or by philosophers of the mind like David Chalmers right now, and then see what further steps we can take to reach the Advaitic or non-dualistic understanding of consciousness. So that second approach is, I'll just outline what I feel about it. Recently, Christoph Koch, who is the chief scientist of the Paul Allen Brain Institute, he launched his new book, The Feeling of Life Itself. So now it's an online event nowadays, like everything else. It was the Harvard bookstore. And I was very interested to see that here is this person who's studying consciousness entirely from the perspective of the brain, of course, neuroscience. But now there are these, I noted a few things he said. First, very encouraging, he said that consciousness is most important. There's nothing as important as consciousness. And I was thinking, well, we have come a long way. There was 20, 25 years ago, there was nobody who was seriously interested at all in consciousness in the sciences, even in brain science also. They were dismissive of the whole thing. And now here is a leading neuroscientist in the world, one of them, saying that consciousness is the most valuable thing in the entire universe, because he says that suppose you give me $1 billion and tell me that, Christoph, you have to give up your consciousness and you can live as a zombie, your body will be fine, your brain will be fine, everything goes on, but you just are not conscious at all, and we'll give you $1 billion. I'd say, no, it has no meaning for me if I'm not conscious. So consciousness is the most important thing in all of the universe. That is a big takeaway, and we would agree, non-dualism would agree with him there. Second, he is working with Tononi, developing this theory called the integrated information theory, where one takeaway is that consciousness is everywhere. So that's a huge, huge step forward. It's still something materialistic from their perspective, but it's everywhere now, especially in all living beings. Again, a huge step forward from the time just 20, 25 years ago, where people said consciousness, whatever it is, scientists would say it's only in, human beings or higher primates like us, not even lower animals. Now all animals, all living cells, and he was even saying even non-living beings might have a base level of consciousness. So that's another encouraging takeaway. The third encouraging takeaway from him was this very study of consciousness, because he says, I am a conscious being, and the study of consciousness showing that it is everywhere has transformed my personal life, which was a very interesting thing that I noted. It has to transform your personal life if it's a genuine quest into consciousness. He says, I have over time become a vegetarian. I can't kill an insect now because, as he said, this insect represents a tiny flash of consciousness. The two bookends of eternal darkness before, eternal darkness afterwards. There's a little flash of consciousness in little insect's life. So how can I kill it? Advaita would not agree there, but Advaita would say, good, you're on the right track. What more needs to be done? So from this...
Hold on, what? Advaita wouldn't agree there.
So how can I kill it? Advaita would not agree there, but Advaita would say, good, you're on the right.
Is it because the consciousness exists only in a mere moment and that is it? It doesn't continue living on. Okay, I get it. So basically, I think he's saying that the fact that Advaita would say that no, even if you kill the creature, the consciousness will still exist. It will just move on to another form, another creature, another whatever it may be. Okay. I thought it meant like killing the bug, Advaita wouldn't agree with, which would be weird, but yeah.
Track. What more needs to be done? So from this, the next step would be to ask this question about the hard problem of consciousness. So how can a material objective entity like the brain produce consciousness? That's the basic thing of the hard problem of consciousness. And it is interesting. I posed this question to him, to Christoph, and he immediately rejected it. He said, we can't do that. The same thing which I was saying earlier, the chorus of protest. If we accept the hard problem of consciousness and take it as a genuine question, then we can't do brain science. And our answer, I'm sure Rupert would agree, is that you can do brain science, but you have to accept the hard problem of consciousness. Otherwise, the brain science won't get you anywhere ultimately. So hard problem of consciousness shows you that the brain itself is not producing, not that its consciousness is produced. Then the next step would be to see that consciousness is not an object. It's not part of the material universe. So this is where panpsychism, where someone like...
Before we continue, that's my biggest problem right there. Is to say that your consciousness is non-materialistic. Basically, there's no way to measure it. I'm assuming there's no way to measure it, no way to see it, no way to touch it with our five senses, obviously, and no way to measure it with any kind of science machine. That is the reason why it's very difficult for me to accept that is because any religion can say that exact same thing about their God or anything, and you just have to accept that as true because there's just no way to prove it. And that's the hard thing for me to accept whenever you say, oh, you can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't feel it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it, you can't measure it with any kind of science, no matter how far in the future you can get. It's not in the material realm, but it exists, but it cannot be measured. It's like, wait, it cannot be measured in any way, shape, form, but yet it exists. If it exists, it must be measurable. So that is the very much the most difficult thing that I cannot accept, because you cannot just say something exists but cannot be ever measured in any way, shape, or form. It just doesn't make sense. That's the reason why I guess maybe I'm wondering, like I was thinking this a little bit earlier when you were talking about consciousness, I was thinking of a car. When you turn the engine, it requires a starter to start the car. But once the car started, it can go on without the starter. The car's running and going. I'm wondering if that's I'm not saying it is, but I'm just wondering if that's maybe how it works with us. You know, once we are born into this world, that starter just cranks it up and now we're going. I don't know.
David Chalmers says that consciousness is everywhere. But what he basically means is that everywhere exists, there's a material universe, and somehow consciousness is in and through everything there. Big step forward again, but still, that's not quite right. Consciousness is not an object out there. You are consciousness. It is the pure subject in which the entire universe appears. And we will say ultimately the entire universe is not different from consciousness. So this ultimate subjective nature of consciousness, quite different from a thing out there. There are many things out there, and now we are talking about this wonderful thing called consciousness out there. No. From there, you have to take one more step. So we have left Christoph Koch far behind. We have now leaving David Chalmers also behind. But this is the next step where scientists and philosophers of mind must confront this. Recently, I had the privilege of spending a year as a fellow at Harvard University. So one thing I took up was a course in the philosophy of mind. And I noted that the philosophy of mind as it stands now, I think Descartes was the last person who said anything impressive in the philosophy of mind, more than 300 years ago. And the last 100 years, if you look at all the papers We did a survey of all the papers, important papers. It's one group of philosophers is saying that consciousness and mind, they don't distinguish. Consciousness and mind are nothing but either the brain or language. It's just an illusion created by language. You might say that's ridiculous, but this seriously, very smart people are seriously trying to say that. Or it's an illusion created by behavior. So somehow trying to dismiss mind and consciousness, bring it down to some physical basis. And another group of philosophers like Thomas Nagel or Jackson or John Searle, giving various thought experiments to show, guys, this doesn't work. You can't reduce mind and consciousness to this. So the philosophy of mind, I'm saying, is stalled. As Rupert was saying, without that ultimate science of consciousness, you will not get an answer. So therefore, a pure subjective nature of consciousness, and then ultimately, the entire physical objective universe, what is its relation to this pure subjective consciousness? That it is nothing other than that pure subjective consciousness appearing as an other. So that's the pathway I see before us, going from present neuroscience to the non-dual understanding of consciousness. Yeah.
Rupert, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, just a couple of things. This the prevailing understanding of consciousness in philosophy of mind circles that you mentioned, Swami. These many of these ideas that you mentioned go back to Thomas Nagel's definition in I think it was sometime in the 70s, when he suggested that an entity can be considered to be conscious if there was something it was like to be that entity. In other words, if that entity had the experience of being myself. Well, a table obviously doesn't have the experience of being myself, and therefore a table is not conscious. So, a tree does not have the experience of being myself, and therefore that object is not conscious. However, a bat or a dog or a cat has the experience of being myself, although it of course doesn't conceptualize that experience, and therefore the bat, the dog, the cat can be considered to be conscious. The bat, the dog, the cat can be considered to be conscious. This
can be considered, not can't. And so this is an experiment that I saw on YouTube too, where they put a large mirror out in the forest and they had the camera recording it, where they had I guess this was more of a measure of intellect, but it was very fascinating to see animals looking into a mirror and they see the reflection, but they do not see it as themselves for the most part. I think apes were capable of seeing it as a mirror as opposed to as something else. So when a tiger walked up to it, they saw another tiger. I was thinking maybe along this lines, this could be awareness, aware that you are who you are by looking in a mirror, but that could also be a measurement of intelligence also, perhaps.
This is the fundamental misunderstanding upon which all these other ideas that you referred to, Swami, are based, and it is based on a misunderstanding about ourselves, namely that I, as a human being, am conscious or have consciousness. This is the fundamental presumption that informs this definition of consciousness and all the ideas, the hard problem of consciousness and everything that comes from it. That consciousness is a property of a human being. It is something we have, and this is the fundamental misunderstanding. It is not obviously tables, chairs, trees are not conscious, but I would suggest that dogs and cats and bats are not conscious. I would suggest that human beings are not conscious or aware. Only awareness is aware. Our knowledge that we are aware is not the knowledge that a person has about awareness. It is awareness's knowledge of itself, because awareness is the only one that is aware. Therefore, awareness is the only one that can know anything about itself, or indeed about anything else.
And well, I would say that's necessarily the reason why I made that in the very beginning of this video about things must manifest in consciousness for you to be aware of it. that's almost what he's saying here. Maybe it is. I'm not sure yet. I can't say, oh, that is what he's saying, but that could very well be it. So the consciousness can only be aware of what's inside consciousness.
So the knowledge of being myself, in other words, the knowledge of being, is consciousness's knowledge of itself. It is not the knowledge that a human being has about themselves. Humans are not aware. Only awareness is aware. And that must be, to go right the way back to the first statement you made, I think, Rick, at the beginning of this last question. You said, how do we know that our awareness is not a reflection of the, or not, I think that's what you said, not a reflection of the infinite.
What he said before this part was the fact that he makes it this Turiya something separate from the human body, which is, in a sense, what I think Swami, or at least Advaita Vedanta, has been kind of saying, at least from the teachings of Swami Sarvapriyananda here, is the fact that, you know, there's four. There's the waker, the waker, the dreamer, the deep sleeper, and then Turiya, or the fourth, as he says. And he's saying that it's very fascinating. It said that the human is not aware of itself. It's only the consciousness that is aware, which I do agree, I do believe, because the finger is not aware of itself. I am aware of the finger. The hand is not aware of itself. I am aware of my hand. The brain is not aware of itself, I don't think. I am aware of the brain. And what is this I? Consciousness, Turiya. But again, I still think it's inside the brain. A very specific part of the brain is where our consciousness is. Again, because I have not experienced anything that says otherwise. And one terrible way to kind of prove the point is, once you destroy the brain, the awareness, consciousness of that brain is gone. Now, I know some can argue the fact that, well, that you didn't destroy the consciousness portion, because it's something that it cannot be destroyed nor created. It is pure consciousness. But but I think it's very difficult to prove that in the brain, in the mind, or the brain, I'm sorry, because it would be a heinous crime. So there's no way that a person, say a scientist, can go on a live human being, could open their skulls and say, are you aware? And it says yes. Then you chop off a piece of that brain, remove it. Are you still aware? And then you chop off that piece, another piece of the brain, and remove it, and continue to ask the person whether they're aware or not. That is something that's the reason why I guess we haven't quite figured out where consciousness is. It's because we cannot test the theory of it. We cannot do this to a human being until, imagine they cut off a piece of the brain and said, are you aware? And just say he died. So that piece of the brain, they remove that part on another person and leave the rest of it there. And the person is breathing, you know, you touch him, he reacts, but he's not aware anymore. And perhaps at that point we can say this is where the consciousness is. Because if you remove this one piece, if it so happens to be, if you remove this one piece, everything, this person becomes a zombie. Everything is functioning. He's just not responding. There's no awareness there. You feed the person, and the body still develops in every way. You still see brain activity for the breathing, the blinking, the liquids, and everything else for the function of the body. But he's unresponsive. Perhaps that would be a proof of the consciousness. Again, there's no way to know for sure, because this kind of experiment would never happen, because it's just completely wrong to do that to a live human being, to start chopping up their brain and messing them up.
Our awareness is not a reflection of infinite awareness. The awareness with which each of us is currently aware of our experience is infinite consciousness. That the space that exists. There are however many of us, how many are we? 650 or so. There are 650 people gathered together. We're all sitting in different rooms. The space in each of our rooms is not a reflection of, or a byproduct of, or a part of the space of the universe. There are no parts to the space in the universe. It's a single, unmodified, undivided whole. So the space in each of our rooms is the infinite, or relatively speaking, the infinite space of the universe. The awareness, the very awareness with which each of us is now aware of this conversation is infinite awareness, the only awareness there is, albeit channeled through the localized perspective of a finite mind. So that's one thing I would just like to add to what you said, Swami, and just very briefly about where non-duality is going. You spoke, Swami, about where it might go in scientific and philosophy of mind circles. So I'd like to say something about the other end of the spectrum, to regular people like us. I'm sure there are plenty of philosophers and scientists here, but the people, most people who are interested in these matters, not from a philosophy or scientific point of view, but simply that they're interested in peace, in happiness, in love, in how to live. These are not just the relatively few philosophers and scientists. This is all 7 billion of us. All 7 billion of us are interested above all else in happiness. Not everybody is interested in enlightenment, but everybody is interested in happiness. And it's basically the same interest. And I feel that the future of non-duality is that through numerous different channels, such as this, the non-dual understanding, which was once encoded in esoteric language and enshrined in ashrams and monasteries, is now being made available really for the first time to everybody. I feel that this is the age of the direct path, and that everybody, simply by virtue of the fact that they love happiness, is ready for this understanding and is quite capable of understanding it. And so I feel that this is the time when this understanding should be tailored and made available in simple, clear, ordinary language, and that these very simple, experiential, direct pathways be made available so that everyone can experience for themselves that the nature of their own being is happiness, and they share their being with everyone and everything.
I'm glad you brought up direct path. Oh, Swami, did you want to add?
I know where you're leading with that, but before that, a couple of observations. Yes, I totally agree with Rupert. I just wanted to say a couple of things which I was reminded of. When you said it was esoteric knowledge limited only to a few people, so I was reminded of Vivekananda, Swami Vivekananda. He said his mission was to bring Vedanta from the forests to the cities. And the other thing that we can all do it, as he says, Ramana Maharshi, it seems that somebody asked him, am I qualified for non-dualism? And you know, Ramana Maharshi's famous approach was, you find out who I am. So that he would throw the question back to the questioner and say, find out who is asking who I am. So Ramana Maharshi said, did you say I? Did you use the word I? Then you are qualified. If you say I, then you're qualified to ask who I am, and you're qualified for non-dualism. Absolutely.
Okay, I'm gonna pause right here. So yeah, anyways, let me know about the questions that I've asked, and I want to cut it pretty short because it's going for an hour again. So this is the end of part 2. If you like my content, please consider subscribing, thumbs up, thumbs down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next vid.